Ted Cruz thought he could destroy Jasmine Crockett's rising political career by challenging her to a debate in their home state of Texas. What happened next was so devastating that it ended his 12-year Senate career and made him a national laughingstock. The University of Texas at Austin's Frank Irwin Center was packed to capacity on that sweltering October evening, with over 16,000 Texans filling every seat for what local media was calling the Battle for Texas. The debate had been Cruz's idea, a way to reassert his dominance in Texas politics while simultaneously destroying the rising star, who was making him look increasingly irrelevant on the national stage. Senator Ted Cruz sat behind the debate podium on stage left, wearing his signature Navy suit and the smug expression he'd perfected during his years of grandstanding in the Senate. He'd spent weeks preparing for this moment, convinced that his Harvard Law debate training and decade of political experience would easily overwhelm a freshman congresswoman who'd only been in Washington for 3 years. Representative Jasmine Crockett sat across from him wearing a sharp burgundy blazer and carrying herself with the quiet confidence that had become her trademark. She'd initially declined Cruz's challenge, calling it political theater, but when he'd publicly questioned her intelligence and commitment to Texas on Fox News, she'd changed her mind. If Senator Cruz wants to debate policy in front of Texas voters, she'd said, "I'm happy to educate him." The moderator, veteran Texas journalist Sarah Martinez from KXN Austin, laid out the format: 6 segments covering immigration, healthcare, education, the economy, energy policy, and closing statements. Each candidate would have 2 minutes to respond to questions, followed by 1-minute rebuttals. Cruz had privately told his staff this would be like taking candy from a baby. His strategy was simple: use his prosecutorial skills to make Crockett look unprepared, attack her radical positions, and remind voters that he was the senior senator while she was just a junior House member from Dallas. What he didn't know was that Crockett had spent the past month preparing like this was a Supreme Court case, not a political debate. Senator Cruz, Martinez began, "You've criticized Representative Crockett's immigration reform bill as dangerous and anti-Texas. Can you explain specifically what provisions you oppose?" Cruz launched into his prepared attack with the confidence of someone who'd never lost a debate that mattered. Sarah, Representative Crockett's bill is a disaster for Texas border security. It would essentially open our borders to unlimited illegal immigration, putting Texas communities at risk and burdening our state with costs we can't afford. He looked directly at Crockett with a condescending smile. "My opponent doesn't understand that border security isn't just a federal issue. It's a Texas issue. We need leaders who will stand up to Washington liberals, not enable them." Crockett's response began quietly, almost conversationally. "Senator Cruz just told this audience that my immigration bill would open our borders to unlimited illegal immigration. That's not just wrong, it's a lie. And since we're in Texas where people value straight talk, let me give you the straight talk." She turned to face Cruz directly. "Senator, have you actually read my immigration reform bill?" Cruz's confident expression flickered. "I've reviewed the key provisions." "That's not what I asked," Crockett interrupted smoothly. "Have you, Ted Cruz, personally read the 247-page Comprehensive Immigration Reform and Border Security Act that you just called dangerous?" The arena fell silent. Everyone could see that Cruz was trapped. "I've been briefed on the bill's contents," he said defensively. "So that's a no," Crockett replied. "You've been attacking legislation you haven't read, making claims about provisions you don't understand to an audience of Texans who deserve better from their senior senator." She opened her portfolio and pulled out a document. "Let me help you understand what's actually in the bill, Ted. It increases border security funding by $4.2 billion. It adds 750 new Border Patrol agents. It requires biometric tracking for all visa entries and exits. It mandates E-Verify for all employers." Cruz tried to interrupt, but Crockett kept going. "The bill also includes $2 billion for border wall construction and maintenance." "That's right, Ted. The bill you called anti-border security actually funds more wall construction than any bill you've ever supported." The crowd was completely engaged, now sensing that something significant was happening. "But here's what really bothers me about your response, Senator." Crockett continued, her voice taking on an edge. "You said I don't understand that border security is a Texas issue, Let me tell you about my understanding of Texas border issues. She walked closer to his podium. I've been to every major border crossing in Texas. I've met with Border Patrol agents, local sheriffs, mayors of border towns. I've seen the detention facilities, talked to asylum seekers, witnessed drug interdiction operations. She paused. When's the last time you visited the border? Ted, not for a photo op, not for a press conference, but actually spent time understanding the challenges our border communities face. Cruz's face was starting to redden. I've been to the border many times. When I should, Crockett pressed. Give me a specific date, location, and purpose. Cruz stammered for a moment. I don't have my calendar memorized. I do, Crockett said, pulling out her phone. Your last border visit was 18 months ago, a 30-minute photo op in McAllen, where you didn't speak to a single Border Patrol agent or community leader. Meanwhile, I've made 14 border visits this year alone. The crowd was starting to murmur, sensing that their senior senator was being systematically dismantled by someone who'd done her homework. But let's talk about what you have been doing instead of visiting the border. Crockett continued, her voice growing stronger. 2 years ago, when Texas was hit by a winter storm that killed over 200 people, where were you, Ted? Cruz's face went pale. Everyone in Texas remembered his Cancun trip during the winter storm crisis. You were in Cancun, Crockett continued, drinking margaritas on a beach while Texans were freezing to death in their homes. And when you got caught, you blamed your daughters and threw them under the bus to save your political career. The arena erupted in boos directed at Cruz. He tried to respond, but Crockett wasn't finished. That's not Texas leadership, Ted. That's Texas abandonment. And it's a pattern with you. When Texans need you most, you're either grandstanding in Washington or vacationing somewhere else. She turned to address the audience directly. Texans deserve a senator who shows up, who does the work, who puts Texas first instead of their own political ambitions. Ted Cruz has proven over 12 years that he's not that senator. The moderator tried to move to the next topic, but Cruz demanded a rebuttal. His usual composure was completely gone, replaced by desperate anger. Representative Crockett is engaging in personal attacks because she can't defend her radical agenda, he said, his voice rising. She's a junior member of Congress who's accomplished nothing while I've been fighting for Texas values in the Senate for over a decade. Fighting for Texas values, Crockett repeated, incredulous. Ted, you've been in the Senate for 12 years. Name one major piece of legislation you've authored that became law and helped Texas families. Cruz opened his mouth and closed it. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. I'll help you out, Crockett said. The answer is zero. In 12 years as Texas's senior senator, you haven't authored a single major law that's helped Texas families. Not one. She pulled out another document. Meanwhile, in 3 years in Congress, I've authored legislation that's brought $2.3 billion in federal investment to Texas. I've secured funding for Houston's flood control projects, Dallas's infrastructure improvements, and rural broadband expansion across East Texas. The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on every word. But here's what really shows the difference between us, Ted, Crockett continued. When that winter storm hit Texas, I was in my district helping coordinate emergency shelters, checking on elderly constituents, working with local officials to restore power and heat. Her voice grew more personal. I spent 3 days without power myself because I live in the same community I represent. I face the same challenges as my constituents. When they suffer, I suffer. When they succeed, I succeed. She looked directly at Cruz. That's what representation means, Ted. It means showing up. It means doing the work. It means putting the people you serve ahead of your own comfort and ambition. Cruz tried one more desperate attack. The people of Texas know I've been fighting the radical liberal agenda in Washington. The people of Texas know you've been fighting for Ted Cruz in Washington. Crockett cut him off. Every vote you cast, every speech you give, every decision you make is calculated to benefit your political career, not Texas families. She walked to the center of the stage. You ran for president while serving as our senator, abandoning your duties to chase your own ambitions. You've missed more Senate votes than almost any other senator. You've accomplished nothing of substance in 12 years. Her voice rose to fill the arena. Ted Cruz doesn't represent Texas. He represents Ted Cruz. And after tonight, I think everyone in this room understands the difference. The crowd erupted in sustained applause that lasted nearly 2 minutes. Cruz sat slumped in his chair, looking like a man who'd just watched his career end in real time. The debate continued for 4 more segments, but it was essentially over. Cruz's responses became increasingly desperate and incoherent. Crockett systematically dismantled his positions on healthcare education, the economy, and energy policy, each time revealing his ignorance of the issues and his absence from the work of actually governing. By the closing statements, Cruz looked defeated. His final remarks were a rambling defensive plea for voters to remember his conservative credentials and ignore what they just witnessed. Crockett's closing was devastating in its simplicity. 12 years ago, Ted Cruz asked you to send him to Washington to fight for Texas. Tonight, you've seen the results of that fight. No major legislation passed, no significant accomplishments, no real representation when you needed it most. She paused, looking out at the crowd. I'm asking for your trust to continue representing Texas in Congress, and if you'll have me to replace Ted Cruz in the Senate. Not because I want a promotion, but because Texas deserves better. She gestured toward Cruz. You've seen tonight what happens when someone who does the work debates someone who just talks about the work. You've seen the difference between showing up and showing off. Her voice grew stronger. Texas doesn't need senators who abandon us during crises, who accomplish nothing in Washington, who put their own ambitions ahead of our needs. Texas needs senators who show up, who deliver results, who remember that we work for you, not the other way around. The standing ovation that followed lasted over 5 minutes. Cruz sat motionless, staring at the podium, looking like a man who'd just realized his political career was over. Within hours, clips of the debate were viral across every platform. The moment when Crockett asked Cruz to name one major law he'd authored was shared millions of times. The Cancun reference got its own hashtag. Political commentators called it the most one-sided political debate in Texas history. The response was immediate and brutal. Cruz's approval ratings, already underwater, plummeted to historic lows. Major Republican donors began distancing themselves from him. Even conservative media figures struggled to defend his performance. But the real damage came from his own party. Within a week, 3 major Texas Republicans had announced they were considering primary challenges against Cruz. The Texas GOP, embarrassed by his performance, began quietly encouraging alternatives. The breaking point came 2 weeks after the debate, when internal polling showed Cruz losing to Crockett by 18 points in a hypothetical Senate matchup. In Texas, a state he'd won by double digits just 6 years earlier. That's when Cruz made the announcement that shocked the political world. In a hastily arranged press conference, looking tired and defeated, he announced he would not seek re-election to the Senate in 2024. After much prayer and consideration, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I've decided that I can best serve Texas and the conservative movement in other ways. I will not be seeking re-election to the United States Senate." The political world was stunned. Cruz had been considered a rising star in conservative politics, a potential presidential candidate. Now he was quitting after being thoroughly demolished by a congresswoman he'd thought he could easily defeat. In her response to Cruz's announcement, Crockett was gracious but pointed. "I respect Senator Cruz's decision to step aside, though I wish he'd made it 12 years ago, when it might have spared Texas a lot of disappointment." She continued, "This was never about destroying Ted Cruz personally. It was about showing Texans what real representation looks like compared to political performance art." The debate simply revealed what many Texans already knew, that we deserve better. 6 months later, Cruz was working as a lobbyist in Austin, his national political career over. Crockett, meanwhile, was being courted by Democratic leaders to run for his Senate seat, with polling showing her as the overwhelming favorite. The debate that Cruz had orchestrated to destroy Crockett's career had instead ended his own, providing a perfect example of what happens when political theater meets actual governance, when performance confronts preparation, and when someone who's done the work faces someone who's just talked about doing the work. In her first major interview after Cruz's retirement announcement, Crockett was asked what she'd learned from the experience. "I learned that Texans are hungry for authenticity," she said. "They're tired of politicians who promise everything and deliver nothing. They want representatives who show up, do the work, and put Texas first." She paused. Ted Cruz spent 12 years in Washington building his brand instead of building Texas's future. That debate didn't destroy his career. His own record did. I just made sure Texans could see it clearly. Surname 1. The lesson was clear in an age of social media accountability. An informed voter's political reputation can't survive contact with actual performance records. And when someone who's done the work confronts someone who's just talked about the work, the truth has a way of ending careers that were built on nothing but hot air and false promises. Ted Cruz thought he could destroy Jasmine Crockett by challenging her to a debate in front of Texas voters. Instead, he provided her with the perfect platform to expose 12 years of failed leadership, abandoned responsibilities, and empty accomplishments. His political suicide became her political validation, proving that sometimes the best way to end a career built on performance is to demand an actual performance.